Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Kris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Kris and Bill Tenney-Britton here today to talk about how to create a spiritual conversation. Now, when I say creating a spiritual conversation, I mean just that. How do you go out, if you're going to do evangelism, if you believe in the Great Commission, then you have to hang out with unchurched people. And when you hang out with unchurched people and you want to share your faith, you want to be able to do that in a way that you can be heard. And you don't want to do that on the first time you meet them. Or probably the second time you meet them. It takes a while, but be that as it may. How do you have a spiritual conversation? And what does a spiritual conversation look like? Because they're important in sharing your faith. And so that's what we're talking about today. The spiritual conversations, which are the key to culturally relevant evangelism.
Yeah, so before we get too far into this, though, or right up front, right now, we've got to get clear on defining what a conversation is, because there's a difference between debate, discussion, and conversation, right? A debate, we're very capable of doing debate.
We do that a lot.
Debates are arguments in disguise. So you're going to convince me because you're right, of course, and I'm going to convince you because I am always right, of course. And so, but it gets very loud. I mean, there's not mutuality. It can, well, this is my way of doing this, or our way of doing this. I don't think you understood me. Let me say it a little louder.
Oh, there we are. Yeah.
Wait. Let me say it louder.
That's right. Exactly. But the reality is that if you're having a debate with someone, you're not having anything that's going to help the kingdom of God. It may be good for you, and it may be fun.
And you may love it, yeah.
Right. A good debate, it can be a lot of fun.
Yes.
But the reality is that when you're trying to have a spiritual conversation, if you're working with someone who is truly unchurched or an unbeliever, a pre-Christian, then a debate isn't the place to start, and a debate isn't where you want to go either.
Well, debates are basically argumentative, and
Right.
They're heady. You know, that's the only thing is they're very heady. A discussion then might be described as an agenda in disguise. So we're
a conversation with an agenda.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay. I'm trying not to get conversation into my definitions yet. So a discussion means I have an agenda. I'm going to see you as a Christian, and so to do that, then I am going to convince you but in a very nice and genteel type of way.
I'm going to pretend it's a conversation. I'm going to pretend, but I have a point I'm trying to make, and I want you to get my point. And that's opposed to a conversation, which is very different. A conversation is...
A conversation is. A conversation.
Paging Dr. Kris. Paging Dr. Kris. Dr. Kris, to the front and center, please.
A conversation does dictate that one is listening to the person that they are listening, or that they are hearing in their ear.
Yep.
Right? And conversations. So to tell you what's going on here, we are now working with two cameras, and they have these little green buttons, and I'm sitting here, light buttons anyways, I'm sitting here looking, trying to figure out which camera. So I'm watching these lights, and I'm hearing it, but I'm not listening, which is more about discussion, right? Because in a discussion, you're hearing, but you're trying to figure out what's coming next. A conversation really is this. Let's talk about it. It's full of respect and kindness, and that we'll say more. I know you're going to say more about this in a moment, but it is. You talk, I listen. I talk, you listen, and we're teaching, we're learning, and we want more.
And we go wherever.
Yeah.
We let the conversation go
Yes,
this way, go that way.
Right,
I don't have an
that's
agenda. I'm not trying to get you here.
Right.
It's a conversation. It's open. And maybe we'll talk spirituality and maybe we won't. But we're going to let it go, and just because the conversation, the primary point of a conversation is to spend time with someone and enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point. A discussion, I got an agenda.
Right.
A debate, I got to win.
Right.
So there's three differences.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me say about a conversation, one of the pieces I like to have when having a conversation is just to say, I know we come at this from different places, or we may not do this, but really, I would like to hear and see what you are thinking, and help me better understand.
There we are.
Right?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I want to talk about the marks of an effective conversation. A conversation that is, a good conversation as opposed to a discussion or debate. First, number one, a mark of a good conversation is its open-mindedness. I don't come in with agenda. I'm just here to be with you. I'm here to have a conversation. I'm here to spend time and get to know you just a little bit better.
Yeah, and then there's this proportionate listening. I'm going to listen as much as I am going to talk.
All right, that's enough. You talked long enough. Okay, no.
We do this all the time. It is, Right. Are you taking your turn, right?
Are you dominating the conversation, or is it shared?
Right. I know a fellow who works with this, and he'll be with several people, and he's actually making tick marks to see who's talking more than other people are talking, so then he can help with some group dynamics in that.
All right. And then another thing is authentic interest. Am I really interested in what you have to say? Do I really care, or am I watching the little green lights?
That aren't blinking.
Right. Yeah.
Self-differentiation is that we have to separate ourselves from what we're thinking. We get so caught up that what our ideas are really who we are. And I keep thinking this. See, we're talking about spiritual conversations. They come from within us, right? They're not just in our heads. So when I'm talking about being self-differentiated, it means that myself is not all caught up and wrapped up in this. And I have to allow you not to be wrapped up in all of this, that the words that are coming out of your mouth aren't really who you are.
They're not reactionary.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing about conversation, and again, we're just talking about conversation at this point, not spiritual conversation, but a general conversation, is you only answer the questions that get asked. You don't try and get them to ask the right question or the question you want them to ask. You're talking, and if they ask a question, you answer it. If they don't ask a question, you don't put that question in your mouth. Perry Mason would object to that. Yeah. You're leading the witness. You don't lead the witness. The whole point is to have the conversation.
Yeah, and then this last point is to keep the door open for further conversation, for another conversation. Everything is not the end-all, be-all. I remember I learned this with our son, who was a junior or senior in high school, and we would be having what, there, wherefore, the parent-teenager deal, and he'd go tromping down the stairs, going out the door, and I'm yelling at him. And one day I was standing at the top of those stairs yelling, and it's like the Holy Spirit just knocked me upside the head and said, do you want this to be the last conversation you get to have with him, or to have another conversation with him? And I realized this is not the last conversation I'll have with him. I can have more, but not if I shut him down. So I like to think in terms of this conversation. Where can it lead next? What can the next conversation be? If I enjoy my conversational partner, right?
And the reality is that, and just before we're about to start talking about how to create a spiritual conversation, but the point is if you can't have or are not having a good conversation, if there's no chemistry, if you're not, move on. There's 7 billion people on the planet. About 4.5 to 5 billion of them are not Christian. You can find someone else that you can have a good conversation with, that you can gel with, and then you'll have an opportunity to really have a spiritual conversation, to share what's on your heart. So, how do you create a spiritual conversation? Well, the first thing I want to say is it's all about overflow. And I talk about this in a number of my books that I've written, but that overflow is when your heart and your mind and your soul and your spirit is completely and utterly filled up with Jesus, filled up with God. You're reading your scriptures, you're spending time in prayer, you're doing all those spiritual disciplines that just fill you up, and not just a little bit. If you're a sponge, and bad metaphor, but if you're a sponge, and you don't overflow until you are completely saturated. And then if more spirit comes in, it kind of drips out. That's a spiritual conversation is just that. It just kind of comes out.
Yeah. I want you to talk for a moment, too, about how we draw them into conversation. You say a lot about this in your Hitchhiker's book.
Yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to Evangelism.
Yeah, I was going to say Guide to the... Never mind.
Yeah, not that one.
Yeah, not that one.
I didn't write that one.
Keep going.
All right, so you want to draw them in. You want to get them... 1 Peter 3:15 says that you should be ready to share the hope that you have when they ask a question. When they ask. So you draw them in, which is to say a good, honest conversation. And you give them an opportunity. You let them see your faith, your Christianity that is not offensive. And they go, as time goes by, probably not the first conversation, probably not the 9th conversation, but somewhere down the line, they will ask you something about your faith because of what they see in you and what they've heard in you. Draw them in so that they can launch into some kind of question or conversation that is spiritual in nature.
Yeah, well, let me add to that, though. Drawing them in, what I've seen isn't just a question in general, but I've had people come and they ask me about God, about Jesus. And not that I'm some theological expert on that. In some cases, that is, these intellectual, but it's that somehow they've engaged God, perhaps, or they're not sure what it is that they're experiencing. I have had a lot of experience with that in the pagan community, that people are having these God moments, but they're not sure. And that's the second part of creating spiritual conversations, are listening for detour opportunities. I like to think them as connecting the dots. Some of you may be old enough to remember Pee Wee Herman, connect the dots, la la la, connect the dots. Well, I love doing that because somebody may say something and I'm able to say, something like, do you think that might be God? Or, God sometimes works like that. Or, or Jesus, I've known Jesus to do something along those lines. And then that will allow for conversation or not. Sometimes it's like, oh, okay. And sometimes they run the other direction. Sometimes they run and they come back. But it's those detour opportunities. And I'll say, I know it sounds crazy. So, but you're bringing it in. So you have to listen to them. You do have to be in conversation.
Exactly. And the last thing there, not the last thing, but one of the things that is important is you have to be genuine, authentic, and transparent. Yeah. As Christians, so often we guard ourselves because we don't want people to think that we might not be perfect. Christians aren't just perfect. We're not perfect. We're forgiven. Well, that's true. But the other thing is that people need to understand that we own our sin. We own our mistakes. We own who we are. This is who I am. And, God didn't make me sinless. I'm perfect. That's not the way it worked because I'm a fallen creature. And as a fallen critter, I'm likely to do something. And when I do, I'm going to own it. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to move on and try and repent, if you will, not do that again. But the key here is in your conversation to be genuine, be authentic, and be transparent. If you don't have all the answers, I got news for you. You don't. Only she has all the answers. Just ask her. Anyway, no, none of us have all the answers, and I don't.
won that debate.
Yes, you won that. No one has all the answers, and no one expects you to have all the answers. I don't know, or I'm not sure, or boy, I've really wrestled with that too, is a really good, honest, authentic, and transparent answer. You get a lot more respect if you are honest about the things you don't know and the things you might have questions about than if you come across as I'm brash and God said it, I believe it, that settles it.
All right, so here's steering gently, because do you see how I just steered that piece? Steering gently. Where was I going with this?
Okay, here's the deal: is if you're gonna guide a conversation, and again, there's a difference between conversation and discussion. So if you have an agenda, if you're gonna get at it, then you've moved away from a conversation. But you can still steer the congregation so that you're at least near the coastline of spirituality by looking for those opportunities for steering the conversation, but do it gently. You're not there to drag them off into the world of Jesus or into the world of spirituality. You're there to share your life, to hear their life, to hear where they are, and to find the bridges, the connections there.
Well, and that was a piece. So, they may be asking questions and you're saying, I don't know. I'm really not sure. But if that's something you've been interested in, or you think that may be a possible bridge, you could say, hey, I have long, as you said, I have long wondered about that. And so I'm wondering, would you want to do a book study with me? Or, I'm sure that there are some resources out there that maybe we can look at. And they may have a resource. You may have a resource. They could bring something from another faith tradition. You can bring your Christian faith tradition in there, or maybe they want to do it within a complete Christian realm. They can be all over. But again, that's that listening for opportunities and being able to steer gently.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, or actually we're out of time, but I just want to mention two things. Is that the Hitchhiker's Guide to Evangelism, you can get it on Amazon.com. It's a great way for how to have relevant conversations, how to share your faith in a way that won't embarrass you, won't embarrass your church, and most important, it won't embarrass your friends, your coworkers. You won't embarrass anybody, because you'll learn how to share your faith in a way that's authentic and without raising all the hackles that most evangelism practices do. The other thing is to let you know that Phillips Seminary in Enid, Oklahoma, but
Tulsa. Yeah.
Sorry, Tulsa,
yes,
Oklahoma. Okay. And but Phillips Seminary, and they teach a course. I teach a course on evangelism there, and it's an online evangelism course. I want to invite you to consider that 8-week course, and it's an intentional dive into the practices of culturally relevant evangelism, and the URL to Phillips is right there. Hey, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yes, have a great week.